There are moments in history when the truth does not arrive with a roar, but with a whisper carried across decades, sealed inside an envelope that no one expected to see again. And now, my friend, that whisper has broken free. A hidden diplomatic letter, locked away for more than 3 long decades, has surfaced, and inside it lies the one fear Jamaica never dared to confess in public. So pause with me, breathe with me, because what you are about to hear is not merely a story, it is a reckoning. It is a mirror held up to a nation that danced bravely on the world stage, while hiding a trembling heartbeat beneath its jacket. Many of you listening, especially those who have seen more than 60 years of storms and miracles, know that truth has a rhythm. It rises, it falls, it waits. And then, when the world is finally prepared, it steps into the light. Today, we step into that light together. If you want more untold histories, more hidden letters, and more voices that were never meant to be silenced, then hit subscribe, because this journey will stay with you long after the final word is spoken. And now, let us begin. There are stories that begin loudly, with marching bands and brass horns. But this one begins quietly, almost too quietly, in a government archive room where dust lay like a second skin upon forgotten files. The clerk who found the envelope had not been searching for secrets. He had simply been reshuffling records, preparing an inventory, doing the kind of work no one applauds. Yet as his hand brushed across a sealed document marked Confidential External Affairs, something in the old paper resisted, as if holding its breath. According to the archivist's account, the envelope was dated from the late 1980s, a time when Jamaica was wrestling with economic pressure, shifting alliances, and the weight of external influence. To those who lived through that age, the memories have never truly faded. The 1980s carried both music and mourning. Reggae was rising, yes, but so were debts, foreign demands, and unspoken anxieties that no microphone ever amplified. The envelope was addressed to a partner government, penned by a senior Jamaican diplomat, whose name, for now, remains undisclosed in public records. But what matters is not the signature at the bottom. What matters is the trembling truth carried line by line, written with the steady hand of someone who understood that history watches from the shadows. The diplomat began by outlining Jamaica's public stance: strong, resilient, unbowed by global pressure. But then, slowly, carefully, like a preacher lowering his voice before delivering a hard truth, the writer shifted tone. He admitted that beneath the calm exterior, Jamaica feared a development it could not acknowledge aloud. The letter did not scream. It whispered, yet the whisper carried the weight of a confession. He spoke of rising vulnerabilities, of economic entanglements that threatened to pull the island deeper into dependency. He spoke of external actors who were tightening their grip, shaping policies, influencing decisions, bending outcomes in ways the public could not see. Whether these actors were financial institutions, political allies, or rival powers remains unclear. But the diplomat's fear was unmistakable. Jamaica risked losing the ability to choose its own path. You see, my friend, in the Caribbean, sovereignty is both shield and song. Nations sing their independence with pride, but the world does not always listen. Sometimes powerful hands reach in and rearrange the notes. The diplomat wrote that Jamaica saw a storm forming, one that could threaten not only national stability, but regional unity. There was a worry subtle, but heavy, that if certain pressures continued, Jamaica might be pushed into decisions that ran counter to the will of its own people. And that, he said, would be an unforgivable betrayal of the island's founding promise. As I read those lines, I felt something stir, something old, something familiar. Many of you listening know exactly what I mean. When you have lived long enough, you learn to recognize the sound of a nation swallowing its fear. The letter closed with a plea: reassurance, partnership, understanding. Jamaica needed a friend who could hear the truth without exposing it. A friend who would not turn the confession into a headline. Decades later, when analysts reviewed the rediscovered document, some described its unveiling as an Ibrahim Traore moment, a turning point where a long-buried truth demands to be reckoned with, whether a nation feels ready or not. But here is the part that makes the heart beat a little harder. The letter never made it to the public eye during its own era. It was read by a handful of officials, filed away, and then silence. No public speech, no press briefing, no acknowledgement that Jamaica had ever been afraid. And so the island moved forward, year after year, carrying the burden privately, while the people walked beneath the same sun, unaware that a secret fear was threaded through the corridors of power. But, my friend, the truth has its own timing. It waits, it lingers, and when the moment is right, it steps out of the archive and into the light. That is what happened here. The rediscovered letter did more than reveal a worry. It revealed a fracture between public confidence and private vulnerability, between what leaders felt and what citizens were told, between the island Jamaica wished to be and the pressures that threatened to shape what it might become. And if this is the beginning, then the real question is this. If the letter unveiled the fear, what did Jamaica do when that fear finally came knocking? And that, my friend, is where the story turns. There are moments in a nation's life when silence becomes heavier than speech. When the unspoken gathers like clouds over the mountains of St. Andrew or across the calm blue of Kingston Harbor, until everyone can feel the weight even if no one knows the source. That is the moment Jamaica stepped into after the hidden diplomatic letter was written. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The government of the day continued its duties. Budgets drafted, agreements negotiated, international partners greeted with warm handshakes and polished smiles. But beneath that polished surface, something was shifting. Even those who had never seen the letter could feel an unease spreading through the upper halls of leadership. According to internal accounts shared years later, senior officials had read the diplomat's confession with tightened jaws. Some believed the fear was exaggerated. Others thought it was not exaggerated enough. But all of them agreed on one thing. The public must not know. It was not an era of transparency. It was an era of guarded phrases, diplomatic caution, and quiet corridors where decisions traveled in whispers rather than declarations. Jamaica's political class had long practiced the art of appearing confident, even while wrestling with storms behind closed doors. But this storm, the one the diplomat foresaw, carried a different kind of threat. It was not merely financial. It was not merely geopolitical. It was existential. If the pressures described in the letter intensified, Jamaica risked losing the ability to speak with its own full voice on the world stage. That was the fear. And that fear began shaping decisions, even if the public did not know why those decisions were being made. One former advisor described the atmosphere as a country smiling on the outside, but tightening its fists behind its back. Laws were passed with unusual haste. Agreements were signed with little explanation. Foreign delegations came and went more frequently than the years before. Jamaica was repositioning itself, but the reason for that repositioning remained hidden in the archive. Then came the breaking point. The pressure from external actors, whether banks, governments, or private interests, remains unclear, intensified. Conditions were set. Demands were made. Choices narrowed. The fears outlined in the letter began unfolding, not as possibilities, but as realities. And for the first time, the government faced internal division so sharp it left scars that would last well into the following decade. One group of leaders argued that Jamaica must bend, at least temporarily, to protect stability. Another group insisted that bending meant surrendering pieces of sovereignty that would never be regained. The debates grew fierce. Voices rose. Tempers shattered. Some ministers reportedly threatened resignation, believing that the nation was being cornered into decisions it would one day regret. And the people? The people felt something shift, even if they could not name it. Prices changed. Rules changed. The tone of leadership changed. Jamaica's spirit had always been bold, melodic, and unmistakably free. But during these years, the melody softened. It became cautious, guarded, almost as though the island were holding its breath. International observers, watching from afar, described Jamaica's public posture as strangely restrained, almost muted. One analyst even remarked that the government's outward composure resembled an Ibrahim Traore reaction, a controlled, measured calm designed to mask deep internal conflict. The climax of the crisis arrived when Jamaica was forced into a high-stakes decision: comply with pressures that threatened its long-term autonomy, or resist and risk immediate financial and political fallout. To this day, the full deliberations remain sealed or lost. But fragments of testimony from retired officials reveal the depth of the moment. One elder statesman recalled that the cabinet room felt like the walls themselves were listening. The choices were laid out in front of them, none of them desirable. And then, as though following a script written by history's own hand, the room fell into a heavy silence. Decades later, he said he remembered that silence more clearly than any speech that followed, because in that silence, Jamaica confronted its fear, the same fear written in the hidden letter, and had to decide whether to bow to it or rise above it. The decision that emerged was neither full surrender nor full defiance. It was a compromise, crafted to withstand the storm without losing the soul of the nation. But compromises have consequences, and though the decision preserved short-term stability, it sowed seeds that would later bloom into questions, doubts, and a reckoning that still echoes through Jamaican politics. To the public, it looked like another ordinary policy shift. But beneath that appearance lived the truth. Jamaica had reached the edge, stared into the depth of its fear, and chosen a path meant to protect its future, even if it meant hiding the past. But my friend, every compromise creates a cost, and this one carried a cost far deeper than Jamaica expected. The consequences did not appear immediately. They arrived slowly, like footsteps in the dark, growing louder over the years until no one could ignore them. And that brings us to the next chapter, where the hidden fear does not simply shape decisions, but begins shaping the future of the entire island. Because consequences, once awakened, have a way of finding their way home. Consequences do not always thunder in like a hurricane. No. Some arrive quietly, stepping across the years like soft sandals on polished floorboards. And that is exactly how the aftershocks of Jamaica's hidden fear began to spread. In the early years following the confidential decisions made behind closed doors, the island seemed calm. The streets of Kingston bustled as usual. Markets opened, schools filled with morning laughter. Tourists still arrived seeking sun, sea, and the pulse of reggae echoing from corner shops. But beneath the rhythm, beneath the everyday melody of Jamaican life, something subtle had shifted. According to retired civil servants who later reflected on the era, Jamaica had accepted certain conditions that reshaped the nation's economic options for years to come. New frameworks were established, designed to secure international confidence, but they also tightened the constraints on local decision-making. Each year, the government navigated a narrower corridor, as though the island was walking through a passage built by hands not entirely its own. And then slowly, the consequences began showing themselves in ways the public could feel. Programs intended to strengthen rural communities were postponed. Funding for education and infrastructure stretched thin. Budget choices became a balancing act, where every priority competed against another, and none could fully win. People saw the results without ever knowing the cause. They felt the limitation without ever glimpsing the letter that described why the limitation existed. Some citizens debated openly. Why did the island seem more cautious with its economic steps? Why did policies appear shaped by invisible boundaries? Why did leaders sometimes speak as though a quiet pressure hovered above their words? But the government never spoke of the hidden fear that had shaped those years. It remained unmentioned, unacknowledged, tucked away like a chapter someone hoped would never be reopened. Then came what one commentator described as the long echo. Younger generations grew up asking questions their predecessors had not dared to ask. Economists revisited old decisions and wondered why choices had been made in the particular ways they had. Historians noticed unusual patterns. Journalists traced contradictions between public statements and administrative records. It was as though Jamaica's past had finally begun tapping on the shoulder of its future. Some of those consequences were economic, yes, but others were social, psychological even. A quiet mistrust had settled between the people and the political class. It was not anger. It was not rebellion. It was a kind of collective intuition, the feeling that something had been withheld, something meaningful, something that might have changed how citizens understood the struggles of the period. Community elders spoke about a season of uncertainty. They remembered how it felt in the 1990s and early 2000s, when policies seemed to shift without explanation, and when strong leaders hesitated to speak plainly. The public sensed an invisible hand in national affairs, even if they could not identify its shape. Meanwhile, those who had read the letter or heard whispers of its existence carried their own burden. Some retired quietly, choosing not to revisit the memories. Others, in private conversations, admitted that the choices of the era were made under extraordinary strain. A few said they regretted the silence. A few believed they had protected the nation, and a few admitted they still questioned themselves decades later. But the most profound consequence was this: Jamaica's political identity changed. The island became more cautious in negotiations, more guarded in alliances, more deliberate in its economic vision. And while some of this caution was wise, some of it was born from the same shadow described in the hidden diplomatic letter, the fear of losing sovereignty. Then, as the years turned like pages in a long book, the rediscovery of the letter reignited everything. When the archived document finally resurfaced, scholars, analysts, and citizens realized that the choices of the past had not been random. They had been shaped by a fear never publicly acknowledged. And that revelation created a new wave of questions. Had Jamaica sacrificed more autonomy than necessary? Had transparency been withheld at a cost too great for future generations? Did the decision-makers act to save the nation or to save themselves? Those questions now echo across community halls, universities, radio discussions, and family gatherings under mango trees. The consequences are no longer quiet. They speak. They insist. They ask the island to confront the truth that once remained hidden in a sealed envelope. And so, my friend, we come to this moment, this crossroads where Jamaica must decide how to interpret its own past. And now I ask you, if you were in the position of Jamaica's leaders at that time, would you have remained silent? Or would you have told the people the truth? Because the next part of this story reveals something even more compelling. How the world, especially the United States and the international community, reacted when the truth finally began to surface. When a truth long hidden begins to rise, the world does not simply watch. It leans in. And when the rediscovered diplomatic letter circulated quietly among analysts and historians, the United States and the international community turned their attention toward Jamaica in a way that had not happened for years. From Washington's perspective, Jamaica had always been more than an island with sun-soaked shores and musical genius. It was a strategic partner, a regional anchor, a voice in the Caribbean whose choices sent ripples across nearby waters. So when questions emerged about past pressures, past compromises, and the shadow of an unspoken fear, American observers began reviewing their own archives. What had the United States known at the time? What had been said behind diplomatic doors? And how had Jamaica's silence shaped regional policy? No definitive answers have surfaced publicly, but what did emerge was a renewed interest in understanding how small nations navigate the weight of larger powers. Commentators across American media described Jamaica's experience as emblematic of the struggle many developing countries faced during the late 20th century. The battle for sovereignty in a world shaped by loans, alliances, and geopolitical bargaining. Across the Atlantic, European analysts drew parallels to their own colonial legacies, recognizing in Jamaica's quiet fear a story that resonated across continents. Some newspapers wrote that the rediscovered letter invited a broader conversation about how former colonies balanced pride with pressure, culture with constraints, and independence with economic reality. Meanwhile, in parts of Africa, especially among nations that had faced similar tests, Jamaica's story struck a deeper chord. Commentators noted that the island's hidden anxiety reflected a challenge many African states had experienced: the struggle to stand tall while powerful voices whispered from the background. African radio programs and journals framed the rediscovered letter not as a sign of weakness, but as evidence of how courage sometimes comes wrapped in silence. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from the global diaspora: Jamaican, Caribbean, African-American communities that had long admired the island's resilience. Many elders in these communities had lived through those decades, watching Jamaica as a symbol of cultural pride. The revelation that the island had once harbored a fear it felt too dangerous to name stirred a mix of empathy, frustration, and reflection. And then there was the broader world: scholars, activists, economists who saw Jamaica's experience as a reminder that history is rarely straightforward. It is layered, complex, full of moments when nations must choose between what is ideal and what is necessary. Through all this, one question began to surface internationally. If Jamaica's past was shaped by a hidden fear, what would its future look like now that the truth had come to light? Because, my friend, when the world looks toward a nation seeking its way forward, it is not merely observing, it is expecting, it is listening, it is waiting. And that leads us toward the crucial final chapter: what Jamaica might become now that the shadow of silence has finally been broken. The future does not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it enters like dawn over the blue mountains, slow, gentle, almost shy, yet unstoppable once its light begins to spill across the land. That is where Jamaica stands now, my friend. between the shadows of what was hidden and the horizon of what can yet be claimed. The rediscovered diplomatic letter did more than expose a past fear. It offered a map, a difficult, uncomfortable map, showing the risks of silence and the cost of carrying unspoken truths within the heart of a nation. And now, in this new moment, Jamaicans young and old are asking the same question. Where do we go from here? Many scholars and policymakers argue that the island's future depends on finally naming what was once left unnamed. Transparency, they say, is the soil in which national confidence grows. Acknowledging the pressures of the past does not weaken Jamaica. It strengthens it. It empowers leaders to negotiate from firmer ground. It empowers citizens to understand the context of decisions made before many of them were born. There is also renewed conversation about economic sovereignty. Younger economists, some teaching in Kingston and others abroad, have begun advocating for policies that reduce external dependency and widen Jamaica's strategic partnerships. They point to regional cooperation in the Caribbean as an avenue not merely for trade, but for shared strength. An island standing alone is vulnerable. An island standing with its neighbors becomes a force. Cultural leaders, meanwhile, speak of reclaiming narrative. Jamaica's global identity has always been larger than its borders, its music, its voice, its spirit echo far beyond the island's shores. But now they say it is time for Jamaica's political narrative to catch up with its cultural one. A nation that gave the world such unapologetic sound should not hesitate to speak boldly about its future. And in community halls, churches, open markets, and family verandas, elders remind the younger generation of something profound: resilience. For all the pressures Jamaica has faced, economic, geopolitical, historical, the island has never broken. It may have bent, it may have been pushed, but it has never surrendered the core of its identity. The road ahead will ask much of Jamaica: honesty, courage, unity, and the willingness to confront the past without becoming trapped in it. But if the island embraces these things, then the rediscovered letter, once a symbol of quiet fear, becomes something entirely different. It becomes a catalyst, a beginning, a chance for Jamaica to define its destiny with clarity rather than caution. And that, my friend, is why the world is watching. Not out of judgment, but out of anticipation. Because when a nation finally steps out from behind its unspoken fear, the world expects something powerful to rise. And now the final question remains: what does this truth mean not only for Jamaica's past or its present, but for the generations that will inherit its future? Because that is the message waiting in the final chapter, the conclusion, where the journey of fear becomes the journey of possibility. There comes a time in the life of every nation and every soul when the past steps forward and asks to be acknowledged. Not to shame us, not to bind us, but to free us. And Jamaica, with its rediscovered diplomatic letter, now stands in such a sacred moment. For decades, a quiet fear slept beneath the surface of public life, a fear that leaders felt but could not name aloud, a fear that shaped decisions without ever entering the people's hearing. Yet here we are, with truth laid gently in our hands, asking us not to turn away, but to understand. And understanding is powerful. Understanding turns silence into wisdom. Understanding turns caution into clarity. Understanding turns a trembling past into a steadier future. Some analysts have called this unveiling an Ibrahim Traore moment, that rare instant when a nation looks directly into the eyes of its own history and chooses honesty over comfort. And there is power in that choice. There is healing in that choice. Because a people who know their truth cannot be easily bent by external pressure, nor quietly reshaped by unseen hands. But this is not only a look backward, it is also a gaze toward tomorrow. As discussions rise across Kingston, across the Caribbean, across the diaspora, a sense of determination is emerging. Jamaicans are asking for clearer policies, stronger sovereignty, deeper transparency. They are demanding that the next generation inherit confidence instead of caution. And the world is watching closely with the same focused attention some describe as an Ibrahim Traore reaction, a careful, analytical anticipation of what the island will become now that the shadow has been named. And make no mistake, Jamaica stands on the edge of yet another Ibrahim Traore moment, a second reckoning, a second opening of possibility. The kind of moment that reshapes how a nation speaks, negotiates, dreams, and declares itself on the global stage. So I ask you now, my friend, what do you believe Jamaica should do with this truth? Should the island continue forward with caution, or step boldly into a future defined by its own voice? Leave your thoughts below. Your wisdom matters more than you know. And if this journey moved you, stirred you, opened something within you, then share this story. Let it travel across oceans and generations. And before you go, make sure you are subscribed, because there are more hidden histories waiting, and together, we will bring every last one of them into the light.